Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Weather Center. Now, I know over the last couple of days I'd mentioned that Wednesday was going to be a bit of a break from making content, but I also did promise you guys we would become a bit more habitual with the video updates. Today, we're going to keep this very short, very sweet, and very simple, in fact, and all we're going to be discussing is how the winter time does seem to be making a full-on resurrection, and a bit of a fierce resurrection at that, as we get closer to Valentine's Day and thereafter in the month of February. Now, if you've tuned in for my last couple of live streams, particularly the one we hosted yesterday at 8 p.m., I did mention my gut has been telling me that I do think because of this very amplified blocking pattern we've been beneath across much of the CONUS over the last several days, preventing winter from really showing itself for a large majority of us, I do think the pattern is once again going to turn upside down as we approach the middle of February. And as you'll see here shortly, these are preliminary indications. We're not looking at anything concrete just yet, but it does seem like Mother Nature is going to once again pull the rug out from under us, and we're going to see winter come back full blast with a resurgence of heavy snow, maybe blizzard conditions, as well as that severe weather threat. Before we get started, thank you very much for joining me today, ladies and gentlemen, and if you do like what you see, please like and share this video with others who may need this information and who may be looking forward to winter making one last final hurrah before we begin transition season after the month of February, and click subscribe if you're brand new to the channel, or at least consider it, as well as make sure your notifications are turned on so you don't miss not only another hard segment in the future, but another live stream as we get ready to roll those out as well. With all that being said, guys, fasten your seatbelts, let's get in here. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, so what we are looking at here is actually called a 5-wave Northern Hemisphere chart, and essentially what this is showing us are the long wave patterns that we have across much of the upper half, if not the entire half, of the globe from a downward perspective. If you were looking down at the North Pole, straight down at the Northern Hemisphere of the Earth, cut in half. And the reason I bring this up is because we are beneath a sharp amplitude ridge starting off initially as an omega block pattern, kind of holding up the jet stream from really proceeding in that west to east zonal fashion. Currently, we're in a very amplified meridional pattern, which means a lot of our long wave and short wave features, large scale and small scale weather features, are moving much slower than if we had that west to east zonal flow. And as such, if I rewind the clock here and come back towards the cardinal hour as we get back into Wednesday, this is Wednesday at 12Z when the valid time is for the model, and you could see down over the United States, I know we are looking at the entire Northern Hemisphere, but I'm fixating particularly on North America right here, and you can see we have that very good blocking ridge beginning to establish itself over the heart of the country, particularly over the Rockies and into the Great Plains, and we have a digging trough just off the west coast. And because of this amplification that we're seeing in the pattern, everything is more or less getting stopped up. It's like a traffic jam on I-4 for my local Floridians out there who are watching this video. Just like the old saying goes, what goes up must come down. Well, in this case, what goes up must come down in terms of as we transition out of this pattern, we're going to have the ridge, and then back behind it, there is always a trough, and then back behind that feature, we will have another ridge. That's how the natural process of the atmosphere sort of ebbs and flows. So even though some people out there may be saying huge pattern shift, we're in a weird pattern right now, it's really not that weird. It's just the natural ebbing and flowing we see with the large-scale atmosphere or environment, especially during the winter time when our polar front and our Arctic or northern branch jet become very aggravated since we are in the winter season. So as I take us through time, and guys, once again, this is a disclaimer, this is a very early glimpse. We're talking 2 to 3 weeks into February because we will be in this more or less lull. Outside of if you live on the West Coast, particularly in the state of California, you will be bombarded by Pineapple Express/atmospheric river conditions for an extended period of time, and I noticed some of our total preset models are actually whispering to us that we could get between 8 to 12 inches of rainfall if you live down in the SoCal area near the Los Angeles, the Edwards Air Force Base area, the San Diego area, and further to the south from thereafter. We could see some very heavy rainfall accumulation that could lead to potentially dangerous conditions on the roads, landslides, mudslides, and those infamous flash flood conditions. We'll save that for another video. I want to show you guys exactly what I'm looking at in terms of what the rest of the winter time is, and perhaps answer a few questions out there that may be alluding to, is winter over with? Are we going to see polar or even Arctic air come back into the picture? Well, hang tight with me. So as we fast forward through time, you can see that sharp amplitude ridge is slowly trudging across the United States. At this point in time, this is Saturday, February 3rd. It is now entrenched across the eastern half of the U.S., providing us with a little bit of warm air advection as it becomes a Rex block setup as opposed to an Omega block. As you can see, we now have have a cutoff anticyclone in the upper levels of the atmosphere with our upper low system that really doesn't look like it's going to do too much for us. It looks like the freezing rain, icing, and especially the snowfall threat, or potential, I should say, has completely washed out with this system. It is cut off entirely from any major jet support, any kind of major vorticity couplet, or a long wave feature that could help to produce even more cyclogenesis or intensification out of it. And as a result, we really don't have that trademark appearance or that characteristic of it to set us up for whether it be severe weather or winter weather on the northern side of it. So again, if I really fast forward the clock here, we're finally going to wash out that ridge. You can see we finally get rid of that ridge. And as I mentioned, we have a trough just upstream of it. And I don't believe this is really going to be a major cold outbreak. We're just going to see another bona fide baroclinic system, unlike this cutoff system that's moving through the southern tier United States, finally make its way in and more or less poise that very cold air right up against the Canadian border of the United States, just like we saw earlier this month before our first Arctic invasion broke out. That's kind of one of the preliminary stages you want to look for if you're getting ready to kind of forecast whether or not winter is going to make a return, or if we're going to get a cold plunge on the front range of the Rockies or up along the Midwest, the Great Lakes area, and so on. If we go even further in time towards Valentine's Day, notice how, as I'd mentioned, what goes up must come down, and what ebbs and flows with the atmosphere naturally takes its course. Now you can see we actually do have an inverted setup. We no longer have a ridge over Conus. We actually have the ridge off our west coast with a trough axis really establishing itself over James Hudson Bay of Canada, Ontario, Quebec, digging through the northern tier United States, the Midwest, the Great Lakes, all the way down as far south as the Gulf coastline. And if I rapidly switch us over to the 500 millibar anomaly chart, this is all the way to the end, guys. Once again, preliminary look. This is not hard facts. This is not my prediction. This is more or less me communicating a gut feeling with you guys. And I do think we're going to see the pattern reverse one more time, if not a couple more times, before we enter transition season and start to approach spring. As you can see here, our height anomalies have flip-flopped entirely. The pattern has capsized. Once again, we have a big ridge building off the west coast of the U.S., trying to move into the Rockies, and we have a deep trough extending through the eastern half of the Great Plains, the Midwest, the Great Lakes, across the eastern seaboard, down into the Gulf of Mexico. You can also quickly see this here at our temperature anomaly chart. If I go ahead and just simply press play and let the model run forward, you can see that ridge providing us with all the warm anomalies across much of the lower 48 before we get that initial trough to dig in over the west coast and help to try to break down that cutoff anticyclone, that Rex block feature eventually. But see, guys, how those warm anomalies kind of stick around? As I mentioned, with that blocking pattern, there's really a lot of congestion in the atmosphere, a lot of traffic, if you will, meteorological traffic, just like on some of our interstate and freeway systems out there. And then finally, as we get towards the back end of the loop, notice how the cold air invades again, and we're left over with very, very cold anomalies, just like we saw at the beginning of January. So for you guys out there who watch the videos or look at the content or any other sources that communicate that this weather is going to go crazy, or this weather is going to be insane or extreme or upside down, you know, it does hypothetically, but I do believe that is a bit more in terms of sensationalism when it comes to communicating that, hey, you know, we have a ridge, and then back behind the ridge we have a trough, and eventually they're going to cycle through, and then with this cool down we're going to have another warm up and then another cool down, and that's kind of the speed bump parameters, or that speed bump rhythm of the atmosphere. And then finally, last but not least, I'll go ahead and press play on our 12Z GFS once again so I can go ahead and kind of communicate the whole picture from top to bottom with the story of the atmosphere. And as you can see, we have our cutoff entity expected to drift through the southern tier southeast United States before exiting off the east coast, finally being reabsorbed by the polar front jet that initially spawned it. And then here comes our next baroclinic system. Could see some pretty good snowfall for the upper Midwest, getting into the Great Lakes before finally you can see our pattern really amplifies towards the back end of the loop, and the GFS is predicting we could have not one, but two major storm systems, potentially even bringing down some bona fide Arctic air out of Canada one more time before we get through the month of February. And I'm going to go ahead and just keep the loop scrolling, guys. I'm not really highlighting anything specifically nor interrogating any large or small scale weather feature. I just mainly wanted to put it out there for y'all that my instinct and my gut is telling me that we will see another return of really true intense winter conditions. We will likely see some outbreaks of severe weather along the deep south, the southeast, especially the Dixie Alley, kind of the tornado-prone area where we've already had a few outbreaks throughout the winter time. And before El Nino finally crashes and burns between the months of March, April, and May, we will continue to see that threat for severe weather if you live live anywhere from Texas all the way through to the Florida Peninsula, Georgia, and the Carolinas. So if I had to place a bet before we close out this video, I am thinking by the time we're saying Happy Valentine's Day to our significant others, our wives and husbands across the board, I do think we will be gearing up, if not for another major winter storm, but a potential round of severe weather and a cold outbreak for a lot of us over the plains and the eastern half of the U.S. Right now, if you guys really think about it, it makes a lot of sense because the Rockies and the West Coast are being buffeted by those colder temps, heavy mountain snow, and the rainfall, particularly for the California-Oregon coastline. And then eventually, as I've mentioned, with that reversal, what goes up must come down. What continues forward has to ebb and flow naturally with the environment. So we're going to see that eventually flip-flop, and we're going to get it out here across the remainder of the U.S. once this blocking pattern can finally flush its way out. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, that'll wrap up this more so educational / hypothetical forecast, especially this long-range forecast for every one of you out there who are tuning in. And I do thank you for watching today as we conclude this next Weather Center segment. We will likely be going live tomorrow night at 8 p.m. for another Weather Center discussion and conversation with you guys to go over exactly whether or not this has started to trend in our longer range model data and take a look at our ensembles as well, since I know I left a lot of that information on the table without really disclosing it to you guys. I'm waiting for the Euro to come in at 12 Zulu so I can look at those ensembles as well. And then maybe tomorrow we'll have a bit more of a concrete discussion to have at 8 p.m. But again, thank you very much for watching, guys. And until next time, this is Weather Center Nazario, signing out.